lead. How did we get here in Jackson?
Well, one of the things that I think about is the great migration north for Black Americans coming from the Mississippi Delta, from a Jackson to a Flint. And I have some friends from graduate school who have family members who are both in Jackson, Mississippi and in Flint, Michigan. Like the similarities and the parallels, we cannot talk enough about them in regards to the way that people drop the ball in Flint is the same way that is happening in Jackson. And it's about a crumbling infrastructure, not just a crumbling water infrastructure, but a crumbling infrastructure politically, economically, educationally, where now, because there's no water, students are now engaging in virtual learning in a state that is already pretty much at the bottom of test scores and education outcomes in the United States. Now, all of a sudden, you put them back in a virtual learning environment in a predominantly Black city where we know that studies have came out about COVID showing that not only is it a gap in test scores from pre-COVID, but it's also an additional racial gap because people don't have resources. So now you're going to put these kids in virtual learning at home and act like there's some kind of way that's going to be better when they don't have running water at home either. And then, of course, it spills over even into higher education. I mean, we have Deion Sanders coaching Jackson State, the historically Black college in Jackson, Mississippi, and he's saying, "Look, we're trying to get ready for a game. Students don't have what they need." So it ends up impacting everyone, and what it speaks to with the crumbling infrastructure. Of course, we can talk about water pipes. Of course, we can talk about the importance of maintenance. But in a lot of cities around the country, and we've seen this during COVID, there are a lot of cities that are just a few steps away from looking like Jackson. And what we have to ask ourselves is how some of those cities don't end up becoming like Jackson. Some of it has to do with the racial composition of the place and also the economic base that exists in a place which doesn't exist in Jackson. But it's also about the neglect that we see of Black cities. And we just keep going and act like it's not a big deal because honestly, there are a lot of Americans, unlike me, I'm from Tennessee, so Mississippi is right next door. I've spent a lot of time there. And look, I can't imagine it being as hot as it is in Jackson, Mississippi without any running water. And then being told to boil your water in the middle of summer. So, I mean, there are so many problems, but it speaks to a crumbling, not just water infrastructure, but infrastructure overall.
And remind people, this was already, they were talking about cloudy water when they had the boil only. And one of the things, and you should read, everyone, the Washington Post editorial board just published something earlier today, during the show, frankly, about Jackson's water crisis, to Dr. Rashawn Ray's point, as a warning for other cities. But it's the part about the demographics. You know, you've got more than 150,000 people without clean running water. You've got a city amid near record levels of flooding. You've got the inability, as the Mississippi governor, Tate Reeves, said, they cannot produce enough water to reliably flush toilets, to fight fire. They've got paused in-person learning. You can't have businesses operating. The hospital had its air conditioning shut down in the heat. I mean, this is after last year. Remember in February of last year when they had the winter storm burst the pipes and tens of thousands didn't have water for almost a month. Now, as you can imagine, the water bills kept coming. And this is impacting predominantly Black and brown communities. Is that part of the discussion, the dirty little secret politically that no one wants to address? It's not just the fact that infrastructure has been neglected, but why it has been neglected for so long.
Yeah, most definitely. Look, I mean, when we start talking, I mean, look, we could even look at New Orleans and what happened with Hurricane Katrina and which communities were impacted. We talked about Flint, and now we're talking about Jackson. There are also other examples like in Baltimore where, I mean, they've had lead issues in their pipes. All of these are predominantly Black areas in Black cities that have just been neglected. And I'm sure there are some people saying, oh, well, many of these cities are ran by Black people. So it's not like you can just blame the system or the man. It's not necessarily about that. It's about the neglect of these cities. And it goes back decades, actually, to infrastructure and how roads and highways run through these cities. And these cities simply get neglected for suburbs and other cities where they aren't focused on. I mean, we could go down the street or go down the road rather from Jackson to Memphis, where we continuously see these particular issues happening in different cities. So definitely when we start talking about Jackson, Mississippi, it continues to be neglected, and I just feel. I mean, sometimes I honestly don't even have words to think about what families, what students, what people are trying to do without running water. And I also want to make another important point. The United States is large. We know this. One of the largest countries in the world, not the largest, but one of the largest. And we have to ask ourselves how advanced we actually are. That a major city in the South, even though it's only 150,000 people, it's Jackson.
It's a state. It's the state capital. It's the state capital.
Right. The state capital. Like, what does it mean that a city does not have running water? Like, what does that mean for our advancement as a nation? As much as we like to talk about American exceptionalism, oftentimes we see it on full display when people can't get water, when people don't have electricity, when people can't work their